Ethan Cole's journey began not with a loud collapse or dramatic diagnosis, but with quiet, creeping symptoms that no one could quite explain. He was 48 when the first signs appeared, a subtle tingling in his fingertips, and a strange fatigue that clung to him no matter how long he rested. At first, he dismissed it. He was a high-powered executive, always on the move, barely sleeping, often skipping meals. Stress, he thought. Jet lag. Maybe he was just aging faster than he expected. But the symptoms didn't go away. They intensified. Within months, Ethan noticed a troubling heaviness in his legs. Walking short distances left him winded. He found himself fumbling over words, forgetting simple phrases during meetings, then losing track of entire conversations. His assistant noticed. First, she urged him to see a doctor, and because Ethan could afford the best, he didn't waste time with general practitioners. He flew straight to a neurologist in Los Angeles, known for treating elite clients. MRI, blood work, reflex tests, everything came back clean. The doctor suggested stress and prescribed medication to help manage the fatigue. Ethan took the pills, but felt worse. When the muscle weakness spread to his jaw, making it difficult to chew, he returned. The doctor referred him to someone else, then another, and another. What followed was a 2-year spiral of confusion and frustration. Ethan traveled the world, Zurich, Tokyo, Boston, São Paulo, meeting with more than 50 doctors in total. Each one promised answers. Each ran a new battery of tests. Some thought it was early onset ALS, others suspected multiple sclerosis, or a degenerative mitochondrial disorder. One insisted it was psychological. "Your body is fine," he told Ethan, "but your mind is under siege." Ethan didn't believe that he felt the slow breakdown inside him. He wasn't imagining it. He spent millions on private clinics, experimental treatments, even holistic therapies. He went on special diets, sat through hyperbaric oxygen therapy sessions, detoxified with IV drips, and even tried an obscure stem cell treatment in Eastern Europe. Nothing helped. In fact, some of the treatments made things worse. The physical symptoms were brutal, but what wore Ethan down more was the uncertainty. No one could name the disease stealing his life away. He kept a private notebook of every test result and every theory, hoping that somewhere in those pages, the truth was hiding. At night, when he couldn't sleep, he reread the letters from doctors, each one more apologetic than the last. Unclear pathology. We recommend ongoing monitoring. Symptoms inconsistent with known conditions. The words meant nothing. They gave him no path forward, only confirmation that even the smartest minds he could find didn't know what was wrong. Eventually, Ethan gave up. He shut down his company, liquidated his assets, and disappeared from the corporate world. For the first time in 30 years, he had no agenda, no business calls, no assistants knocking on his door. He rented a cabin in a small Colorado town, no cell signal, no noise, and tried to come to terms with the idea that he might not survive much longer. His days became quiet. He spent most of them sitting on the porch, watching birds, reading old books. Some days, he couldn't even get out of bed. Food lost its flavor. His body was weak, and his spirit was hollow. One bitter January morning, too weak to cook, and desperate for a hot meal, Ethan ventured into the only open diner in town. It was a small, worn-down place, linoleum floors, hand-drawn signs, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked in years. A handful of locals sat hunched over their coffee cups. No one noticed him come in except the waitress. She was tall, with freckles and a ponytail, wearing a faded red apron with a name tag that read, Lena. She greeted him with a tired but warm smile. "Rough morning?" she asked, pouring him a mug of coffee, without waiting for an answer. Ethan nodded. His hands trembled as he held the cup. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," she said casually. Then she paused, frowning slightly. "Or maybe longer." He managed a half-hearted laugh. "You could say that." She didn't press him, just handed him a menu, and left him alone. But when she brought back his food, she lingered. "Mind if I ask something weird?" she said. He looked up. "Your hands, do they always shake like that? And that little flick in your left? I saw it when you blinked. My dad had that too." Took years for them to figure out what it was. Ethan was stunned. In 2 years, not one of the doctors had mentioned anything about a flick in his eye. He stared at her, unsure how to respond. They said it was early dementia, she went on, but it wasn't. It was mercury poisoning, from the old pipes in our basement, leached into the water. He drank that stuff every day for years. She spoke casually, like she was discussing the weather. But to Ethan, every word hit like a brick. His mind raced. Heavy metal poisoning. It was too simple, too obvious, but maybe. He asked her more questions. She told him about her father's tremors, the confusion, the misdiagnoses, the final test that confirmed chelation therapy had saved his life. Ethan pulled out his notebook, flipped to a page where he'd written down symptoms. He read them off. She nodded to most. "That's exactly what my dad went through," she said. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat at the tiny kitchen table in his cabin, staring at a list Lena had given him. A test. A local doctor she trusted. A protocol he'd never heard of before. He went the next day. The doctor was skeptical at first. Mercury poisoning was rare, and not usually on the radar for someone like Ethan, but he agreed to run the tests. The results came back within a week. Ethan's mercury levels were dangerously high. The source? Likely a combination of imported supplements he'd been taking for over a decade, and trace amounts from an old dental filling something no doctor had ever thought to check. The treatment was straightforward. Chelation therapy. Nutritional support. Lifestyle adjustments. Within weeks, the tremors faded. The mental fog lifted. By month 2, he could walk without assistance. By month 4, he was nearly back to normal. He returned to the diner often. Not for the food, but for Lena. She refused to take credit. "I didn't heal you," she always said. "I just noticed what no one else did." But Ethan knew better. He had trusted 50 doctors' brilliant minds, with degrees and decades of experience. They had all failed. But a waitress with no formal education had paid attention. She'd made a connection no algorithm could. And because of that, he lived. Lena Thompson had never been to medical school. She had never worn a lab coat, or worked in a hospital. Never studied anatomy, or memorized pharmacology. Her life had been far removed from textbooks and clinical trials. At 34, she had spent most of her adult years pouring coffee, taking orders, and listening to the quiet stories of strangers in a worn-down diner on the edge of a mountain town. But what Lena lacked in formal education, she more than made up for in observation. She had an eye for patterns and a memory that held on to the details that others often overlooked. She had grown up in that same town, raised by a single father, who worked as a mechanic. Their old house had copper pipes and a water heater that groaned louder each winter. Her father had always been healthy, strong, quick with his hands, sharp with his humor. But sometime around her 15th birthday, he changed. It was slow at first. He began dropping tools, forgetting what job he was working on. Then came the tremors in his hands. At first, he blamed it on too much coffee. Later, when his speech began to slur and his eyes couldn't quite focus, Lena knew something deeper was wrong. She remembered every stage of his decline. The endless trips to the town doctor, who chalked it up to age and stress. The eventual visit to a neurologist in the city, who labeled it as early onset dementia. That word haunted her for years. Dementia was a sentence without a cure. Her father seemed to fade before her eyes, and with him went the stability of her world. But Lena never stopped searching. She read everything she could at the local library. Every night after her diner shift, she'd sit by her father's bedside, cross-referencing symptoms on a beat-up laptop. Late one night, on a forum buried deep in the internet, she stumbled upon a discussion between people whose family members had been misdiagnosed with neurological conditions that turned out to be heavy metal poisoning. The similarities were tremors, memory loss, slurred speech, muscle weakness. She brought it up with the doctor, who dismissed it outright. Extremely rare, he told her. Unlikely. But Lena was stubborn. She paid out of pocket for a specialized blood test, using her tips and a small loan from a friend. The results were staggering. Her father had high levels of mercury in his system. The discovery changed everything. They traced it back to the old plumbing in their home and a cheap brand of fish he had eaten daily for years. With the right treatment, chelating agents, hydration, dietary changes, his condition began to improve. He never fully recovered. Too much damage had been done, but he stabilized. He lived another 8 years, lucid, calm, and grateful. Lena never forgot that. She had no interest in becoming a doctor herself, but it gave her a lifelong habit. She paid attention to people. How they moved, how they spoke, their color, their posture, the flicker of their eyes. While others made small talk, she observed. Not judgmentally, just attentively. She noticed when customers' hands trembled while lifting a fork, when someone's voice seemed suddenly hoarse, when a regular walked in with a little less energy than usual. She didn't always say anything, of course. Most of the time, it wasn't her place. But every once in a while, when the pattern rang familiar, she asked, just enough to plant a seed. That instinct, that simple curiosity, was what made her pause the morning Ethan Cole walked into her diner. It was a gray, snow-covered morning, and the bell above the door rang half-heartedly when he entered. He looked out of place, clean-shaven, expensive coat, but hollow in the eyes. He moved like someone dragging weights behind him, not just physically, but emotionally, too. She greeted him like she did everyone, but something about the way he responded, the delay in his words, the tremble in his fingers as he reached for the coffee cup caught her attention. She'd seen that before. She didn't pry. She never did. But as he ate, she noticed more. The way he blinked, too often. The way his jaw seemed to hesitate before chewing. The stiffness in his posture, like he was holding himself together with sheer effort. She let the observations settle in her mind. Something stirred a memory. Her father, struggling to lift his cup in that same way. When she brought his food over, she gently asked, "Do your hands always shake like that?" It wasn't judgmental, just curious. Ethan looked startled, but not offended. He nodded vaguely. Asterisk, Lena continued. You've got this thing your left eye does when you blink. My dad had it too. They said it was neurological, but it turned out to be mercury poisoning. Took years to figure that out. Asterisk, she didn't know why she said it aloud. Maybe because he looked like someone who had heard everything except the truth. She didn't expect him to believe her, but she saw a flicker in his eyes, a pause, like something had landed differently. He asked questions. She told him the story, the misdiagnosis, the symptoms, the test that changed everything. Asterisk, she could tell by his silence that he was absorbing every word. He wasn't dismissing her like most people did when they heard she was just a waitress. In fact, he looked like no one had ever mentioned that possibility before. Asterisk, she grabbed a scrap of receipt paper and wrote down what she could. The test her father had taken. The supplements he'd used. The local doctor who had eventually helped them. It was a long shot, she said, but worth checking out. Asterisk, Ethan left a large tip and thanked her politely, but she didn't expect to see him again. Most people don't follow through. She figured he was just being kind, but he did return. He came back days later, then again weeks after that. This time, lighter in his movements, more color in his face. There was a glow behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. He told her the test confirmed it mercury poisoning, likely from supplements and a few old dental fillings. He'd started chelation therapy, and for the first time in years, he felt hope. Asterisk, Lena listened, stunned but not surprised. She hadn't healed him. She wasn't a genius or a medical savant. She had simply seen something familiar and said something most people wouldn't. That was all. Asterisk, she didn't see it as a miracle. To her, it was what anyone could do if they looked close enough and cared just a little more. Noticing mattered. Listening mattered. Sometimes the smallest comment, the quietest voice, held more power than 100 trained opinions. Asterisk, Ethan insisted on thanking her. He offered to pay her, help her, get her a job, anything she wanted, but she declined. Her life was simple, and she liked it that way. What mattered more to her was that someone had been helped. That maybe, just maybe, her father's struggle had made a difference in someone else's life. Asterisk, every day after that, she kept doing what she always had, serving coffee, taking orders, listening. Only now, she knew for sure. Sometimes, the right words, at the right moment, could change everything. Even if they came from someone with no degree, no training, and no title. Just experience, memory, and the courage to speak.